Welcome to the Tabletop Gaming Guild podcast, a podcast all about the experiences and memories that playing games with friends and families can create. Today we're going to be talking about our feelings on Kickstarter, its effects on the board gaming world, and just what we think about it.
Yeah, so we did 2 interviews so far to gather more information on there. We interviewed Faction Battlegrounds and Eternal Realms, both awesome people, both games I love. I got to play both of them, but no one else on the podcast got to play them. So I'm looking forward to play them with guys in the future when COVID. Yeah.
They both look solid just from checking out the rules and seeing how they play. So there's that.
Yeah, and I think Eternal Realms, the Wizards and Relics one, especially, I think Peter will like because I think
I'm really looking forward to that one.
The type of games he likes. I think you guys will like it too, but I think Peter will really like it. I think all of us will like Faction Battlegrounds, but it is 2 players, so we might have to be like, here's a 2-player game where you guys play this, I teach it, and then we'll play a different 2-player game at the same time or something. We'll see. It'll be fun. But so both of them gave us their thoughts on Kickstarter and their experiences during it. So part of the discussion I wanted to start from is what the benefit is of having, not just even Kickstarter, but having platforms to fund and publish games outside of publishers and what that affects. So for me personally, when I see games that can get funded on Kickstarter and such, it's an avenue for people to circumvent the publishing process in general. Now, I know there's exceptions where publishers use Kickstarter to promote their game. We can get into that in a little bit, but we're just going to focus on I have a game design and I want to make a game. The idea that I think that it is easier to go on Kickstarter exists because you can publish it on Kickstarter a page and run a Kickstarter fairly easily, but I don't think it's actually easy to get the game funded on Kickstarter necessarily. From my experience in watching Kickstarters, and see if you guys agree, that if the Kickstarter doesn't look completed, the game itself, it's most likely not going to fund. If it doesn't have reviews from multiple people, it's most likely not going to fund. And that costs a ton of money because they have to pretty much be done with the game, make a prototype, and send it to a ton of people. Stuff the publisher would have done. Do you guys feel about the same way with that portion?
I mean, I'm in agreement with anything that so far I personally have kickstarted. I want to see that it's pretty much ready to go. I want to see lots of great images. I want a good promotional video. And usually, again, I'm kind of conservative on it. I don't jump usually on the first day, or definitely not within the first few hours. I wait to see how close they get to being funded, usually before I jump in. But I totally agree. I think it needs to have as much done as possible, or I need to have some kind of prior knowledge of the creator. If I know the creator is solid, then I'm more willing to jump in at ground zero, but normally, no. Normally, I want to see something ready to go, and all they're doing is saying, okay, now we just need that little bit of money to make the final product.
Right.
Yeah, I can agree with that. Okay.
But you also said, yes, it does cost a fair amount of money to, create this final product and, make, maybe up to 100 copies to distribute. But that is still nothing in comparison to having to have the game fully designed and then put out maybe 10,000 copies to send to stores and not have them sell.
Well, the thing would be that the difference would be you either do this or get a publisher.
Yeah.
So there's not a middle ground on that. You can't afford. And most batches, from what I understand, are 2,000 to 3,000 copies, print runs.
Yeah.
And a decent amount of money. You can do a 500 print run or whatever, but it's not 10 or 100.
Right.
So the thing is, they're putting a lot of risk in by paying for all this stuff to do it. But yeah.
But most publishers, if you're unheard of and the game is not 100% certain what the final thing's going to look like, a lot of publishers aren't going to be interested. So yeah, sometimes for a lot of people, Kickstarter is really the only option.
You normally all have to go to conventions and game meetups and stuff for publishers to be able to pitch your game, to be able to have it published. And a lot of times the game is not complete for publishers. They have to do a lot of the work. So you get very little money, where if you make it on Kickstarter, you will make a lot more money as the designer.
I want to start off by saying that I have an incredible amount of respect for these people and what they have created via Kickstarter. Creating and running that front page for the duration of the campaign is, I knew it was a lot of work before I talked to these people, but I've got a greater amount of respect for how much work it actually is.
Yeah, it's amazing amount, and risk too. There's no guarantee they're going to fund or make money at all, and they've already spent thousands and thousands of dollars of their money to get the game out.
As for the discussion of Kickstarter versus traditional publication routes, I think there are definite advantages and probably disadvantages to both buckets. On Kickstarter, you're sort of your own boss. So like you take all the risks, but you also get to decide on like how the final product rolls out. If you successfully pitch it to a publishing outfit, they sort of like take on the role of the development to complete the final polishing of the game, as well as marketing. You're probably going to have a much higher print run with a traditional publisher than through Kickstarter. You're going to be carried at distribution a lot easier. So yeah, I think there's pluses and minuses on both camps.
Yeah, and the publisher's going to pay for all advertising. Basically, if you get with a publisher, you take a percentage and that's it, which is very low. And they got the game, and sometimes the developer is still, or the designer still helps with the game after it goes to the publisher, but a lot of times not. So if you're doing that route, you're going to probably be designing multiple games a year and needing to continually get the game published. So that goes on reputation. So there's a lot of advantages to doing that. Yeah, like I said, the disadvantage is you sort of lose your game when you do that. It goes to the publisher. They do credit you and stuff, but it's really, they can retheme the game at that point. Like it might not even be the theme you wanted. It could be completely rethemed. So there's a lot of stuff where if you do the Kickstarter, you're completely in control of it. But then again, you're completely in control of it.
Right.
You don't have a team of... Yeah.
That whole completely in control is totally a double-edged sword. I compare it in brief. A few years ago, New Dimension Comics, the store that I work for, moved to a new location, right? The location that we moved into is a downtown location. The company owns that building. And by going from a rental space that was in a mall to a building that we owned, was a shift. There were a lot of advantages to owning the building that we're in, but also we have to take all the responsibilities for that building if something goes wrong or breaks or anything else happens.
Yeah. So, I mean, if I was to design a game, I don't think I would be brave enough to put it on Kickstarter. So I give them a lot of props for doing that. If I was designing a game, I would myself, personally, I would probably look to going for a publisher because I'm not that brave. It takes a lot of faith in what you did and in people to back your game and to building the network and stuff. It's just crazy. So I want to discuss another portion on there. So that's for your new game designers that want to try to get their game out there without necessarily using a publisher, or they didn't get the right thing they wanted with the publisher or whatever. But the other half, actually it's more than half of Kickstarter for board games is going to be publishers publishing games on Kickstarter. And a lot of that can be considered against the heart of Kickstarter, because the heart of Kickstarter was to help people bring projects to life. These companies don't need help bringing these projects to life. They already have the resources to produce them. So and I'll get into the next part, so don't worry about the Kickstarter exclusives yet, but what do you feel about publishers using Kickstarter to help do like pre-orders of their game?
So yeah, that's the thing. Because you used the key term pre-order there. Some publishers are using it as a method to determine, can I actually launch this title yet? And some are using it as a way to say, hey, let me pre-sell this game so that I can take in a portion of the proceeds from this game, maybe before I have to hit the print button, or possibly while the game is, because the campaign and fulfillment runs long enough that you can plan for some like development time, like the game's design, but it might still need development.
Yeah, there's definitely the aspect, which I don't mind the aspect of kind of using it to get an idea of how well something will sell. But a lot of times it just seems like they're just making an effort to bypass retailers. So it's like cutting out the friendly local game store, which I'm really much against. I know Dan would be against that too. I think that it's a friendly local game store is important because not only is it, a place to get games, but it's a place to actually try these games out and meet other people that play games.
Yeah, that was the next point I was going to bring in a good segue, because I was going to bring in the content of what you guys think about publishers using it in the aspect of circumventing brick and mortar store sales or even online sales. They'll get a higher percentage for it. So that's why you get all your Kickstarter exclusives and stuff, because they get a big margin by not distributing it and only going straight through these things. I think that it's sort of like just Kickstarter wanting money, because Kickstarter's like, I don't care that you're a publisher and not actually trying to do things to, get your business started. We just want your money. And I do think it hurts brick and mortar stores. What do you guys think?
Well, let me talk as someone who's associated with a brick and mortar store. So undoubtedly, Kickstarter is one of the ways in which publishers bypass. I mean, it is a non-traditional publishing route. Like traditional publishers publish a game, get stocked at distributors, and then the distributors sort of pass it down the line to all the little mom and pop shops, of which my store is one. We're tiny, right? And by selling the game directly to the consumer, they of course take a bigger piece of the pie because they can afford to sell it at basically the price that the distributor charges, or less, or more. There's this rash of Kickstarters. I'm not going to give any specific examples, but there's a rash of Kickstarters out there that are basically charging like 10% off retail. And where you know that when the game releases, the online warehouses are going to carry it and they're going to offer their standard discount, which is like 20 to 30%.
Yeah, and it's another thing too that I didn't see actually work out very well for a lot of the Kickstarter campaigns. But I mean, they were fine. They were big campaigns and they made tons of money. But they have brick and mortar store pledge levels where you can get like 20, 30 copies of the game. But the problem is no one's played this. So for the person running the Kickstarter, it's low risk. For a store backing that pledge level, it's high risk.
Yeah, as a brick and mortar retailer, the business cannot afford to lock away its money for a year to a year and a half on an unproven game. Absolutely. So when there is a relatively attractive store level pledge, and like 20 to 30 copies would be way too many for a lot of stores. Like if I think a game is going to do well in my store, I'll order 2 on its initial release. And then I'll restock it if it sells out, and only when it sells out. Stores bigger than me maybe can go in at the level that allows them a case, which is usually 6 units on a board game.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, looking at a couple of the big campaigns, I noticed that not many people actually back those levels. And the people that probably do are probably not brick and mortar stores. They're probably just individuals that are just purely reselling the game the instant they get it. Because that is the sweet spot for Kickstarter games. In general, if you want to be safe, you sell them as soon as you get it. Because once you get past the paid reviewers and the other stuff that were on their homepage, you get the real reviewers in there. And it may or may not do well, but you don't want to stick around to find out. You want to get that out because you will get more money than you paid for it.
Yeah. Do we want to talk about the strange instance of outfits that will back and buy Kickstarter games to flip them because they are in short supply after the campaign is closed and the late pledges are done. You can't get this game anymore, but I really want it. Who has a copy?
Yep, and there's plenty of companies that do that, and I'm pretty sure they don't win out on all of them, but they do win out on enough that it's a good business model for them.
Yeah, it's like Gloomhaven when that went on Kickstarter. As soon as it got out, it's like, oh, there's copies available for $400. Who's buying Gloomhaven for $400? You know, at that price.
I'm not gonna say I spent $220 on Scythe.
Well, yeah, that's with expansions and all that and whatnot. Well,
no, that was the base game.
On Scythe?
I mean, that's what we're talking about, folks.
I thought Scythe was a mech combat game. So that's why I paid that much for it. Because it's like, oh, it's going to be a mech combat game. Everyone's going to love it from work. It's going to be great. We're going to play there and everyone's going to blow each other up. And then they got the game and it wasn't a mech combat game. It was a Euro. And I was happy that it was a lot of fun. But I was disappointed when I read it. But the game, thankfully, was awesome as soon as I got past my misconception that I was going to be blowing people across the face of the planet.
No, I can't say I haven't paid that much for a game, but, you know, when that's like double what you would have paid for it normally, you know, from a retailer, 3 times, yeah. Yeah, no, I won't do that.
I did pay a bit for Twilight Imperium 4th Edition, but
I mean, I think
that was still less than retail.
I think I might have done like the all-in for Oathsworn, and I think that might have been like $400, but I'm getting a lot of things. As well as a fully narrated game.
So I have a final thought here about pre-orders and direct-to-consumer marketing from companies. Even though it does not benefit local game stores, I think direct-to-consumer marketing actually is a thing that not only does exist, but is going to increase down the line. These are companies. They're in this to not only make amazing games, to make money. In order to increase their profit margins, one of the things they do is offer games directly to the consumer because that's going to increase their bottom line. And if that means that those companies stay solvent, pay their employees, employ people, give us awesome games, I'm willing to accept that to a certain extent.
There's another portion of that too. Even though they do that, and even though like publishers put it on there, and even though your indie developers put their games on there, their end goal, and what they really want also is to be in brick and mortar stores too. So that's still going to be there. It does cut out a little bit because your initial audience already has it, but they still want to sell it to brick and mortar because they can actually make more money in the long run from that.
Yeah. As a person who is in the brick and mortar retail industry, I will say that periodically there are games that I want on my shelf that I can't get because my distributor is out of stock. And I don't know whether that's because the game makers are not providing those games to the distributors. Sometimes I feel is the case. I could be mistaken about that though, because I don't know what goes on in those two parties.
So there's a lot of things to that one from my research on publishers and board game productions and how release cycles work. It depends on the size of the board game company, which majority of them are very small companies. Like Portal Games is not a large company. Stronghold Games is not a large company. Those aren't big companies. Stonemaier Games is not a big company. When they do print runs, they do like 3,000. And then it's 4 to 5 months before another print run can be done. And they share the same printers, a lot of them. So with multiple companies. So what ends up a lot of times happening is they prioritize their distribution of their games.
Right. They fuel their own like Amazon stores / websites, direct to consumer channels first to make more money. And then only after that seems to die down do they fuel other channels.
Yeah, and a lot of times like they can't gauge success on a game they've never published before. So a lot of times you'll have instant outages of games if they're really good. Like Wingspan and other examples.
Yeah.
But
that's a potential aspect of Kickstarter that's not fully utilized, where you could use it as kind of getting your initial feel of how many customers you would have and then go to retail. I think it's very much underutilized.
There are definitely outfits that do use Kickstarter that way. They use it as like a test water to determine how big their like real print run should be.
Yeah, and then some stuff like that's unstable, not like unstable unicorns, but that like unstable like is expansions. Expansion sales are unstable. Just especially when you have a game with a lot of expansions. So some publishers you see eventually start putting their expansions on Kickstarter because they started getting more and more worried that people are not going to buy into these expansions repeatedly. So it's a nice, safe test bed to be like, hey, anyone care anymore? Like Colonies, Terraforming Mars Colonies is a good example. They had like 5 or 6, I don't even know how many Terraforming Mars expansions. I have them all, but I don't know how many expansions there were, but there was a bit before then. And I don't think that game would have done very well, per se, non-Kickstarter, because you got all those Kickstarter exclusives in there, like the player. I literally got it for the player boards. It's good, too, because Colonies, or not Colonies, sorry, it's Turmoil, is a really, I don't like it. I don't like it at all. The expansion, I will never play with it, ever.
Yeah.
It makes a game with a lot of stuff have too much stuff. And it already has too much stuff. So it makes it have double too much stuff. And all it does is make the game like 45 minutes longer, too. So it's double worse. So I got the player boards and some like special promo cards from it, but
yeah, I'd have to agree. I really do like expansion route for Kickstarters. A lot of the stuff that I back is expansions or re-releases, things that have been kind of out of print for a long time and they don't know if people still are interested in them. So yes, I like that because it's a game you can look at. Oh, I look it up. Oh yes, this was really popular back in the day. It's easier to know this is going to be a good game rather than something you've never heard of.
Expansions also hooks into one of the other primary limitations of the Kickstarter platform is that every time you go back to Kickstarter as a game designer or game company, you've got to provide new content because they won't allow you to rerun a campaign that you've already run exactly the same way.
Except for when they do.
I mean, yes, there are exceptions, but generally this is their policy.
And that's the other thing. Okay, so I'll do expansion or Kickstarter exclusive, see what you guys think of that first. And then we're going to get into Kickstarter not following their policies ever. So, the first thing would be one of the things that I think is a pro and a con to Kickstarter is that if you back a game on Kickstarter, you can get a lot of what's Kickstarter exclusives. But it's a double-edged sword. Like the Onk game that I just backed, I don't think would be nearly as good retail without all the additional stuff you got. The same thing happened with Rising Sun. Like Rising Sun's not nearly as good without all the Kickstarter stuff in retail. Mezzo was an example. You didn't get all the extra monsters and stuff. So what do you guys think about the Kickstarter exclusives creating like FOMO and sort of like souring the retail release?
So FOMO is fear of missing out, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, Rising Sun's a perfect example that I was actually going to use. So it kind of soured me. I will not buy a CMON game from retail anymore because of Rising Sun. You know, the Kickstarter version, I would rate that a 10. The retail version that I have, I rate that a 6. There's a huge discrepancy. The replay value is so much lower with the retail version because there's so much less content.
I noticed all the games that you mentioned were like these big, heavy miniature games, James. Are you sure you're not implementing some form of bias there?
Well, it is a bias in the fact that I don't back Kickstarter very often, and when I do, I generally only back like the CMON Eric Lang games. So that is my experience. I know plenty of games have that, like the Terraforming Mars one. I back that just for the player boards. Like that was and he didn't really have Kickstarter exclusives, but I've never seen them after Kickstarter. But still, yeah, it does actually, the Kickstarter exclusive thing does actually sway me sometimes.
Yeah, I hate to burst your bubble, James, but I'm pretty sure the player boards were available in the BGG store at some point.
Yeah, they're not, the Terraforming Mars, like from Stronghold Games and stuff, Stronghold Games does not do Kickstarter exclusives at all. So anything they had on there can be sold or afterwards. I just didn't see them, but I already had them, so I wasn't even looking for them. So they could be everywhere, as far as I know. But CMON's very protective of their Kickstarter exclusives because they generally run that as a pre-order platform permanently, so they don't want to make their people mad.
So
it becomes
I'm going to pose a theory, and I'll see what you guys think. Do you think that these Kickstarter exclusives and the higher pledges that they frequently demand, like if you go all in versus the normal levels, do you think that is the people running the pages attempt to hunt whales? Whales being like a general like term for the people that are willing to spend a premium to acquire a limited product.
That is 100% correct, and that is actually what it is. It's a way of trying to get people to get these in by saying, hey, you get all this stuff. And retail-wise, it is a lot cheaper to back the Kickstarter, but they aren't paying middlemen, so they can afford to do that and still have a good profit margin, and they're really just in it to have guaranteed sales at that point. A lot of campaigns will go too far and have too much stuff and make the game worse by the amount of content they added. So that happens frequently, too.
Yeah. The big problem I find with that, CMON's probably the worst for that, where you look at the base pledge where you're just getting like the retail version, and then you get the all-in pledge. With the base pledge, you're essentially getting the retail version. But you don't know how much of the actual game they're taking out of it. So how much of that extra stuff is, game, and how much of it's just like cosmetic stuff. There's been some games I have not backed because I didn't want to do the all-in pledge, but I didn't know if the game would be any good with the base pledge. So I think it's really important, for a good campaign. I know a lot of game campaigns don't do this, but I think those extra pledges should be mostly cosmetic improvements as opposed to actually adding content to the game.
So unless Eric Lang's name's on it, because it's me, I don't auto-back things. So the only way that I'm going to back a Kickstarter is if I've already played it, like it's available on Tabletop Simulator. I've played a copy of it for one reason or another. But if they don't have the rulebook, if they don't have the rulebook on there, no way. Like if I can't read the rulebook to get a general gauge of the game, it's not happening. And then beyond that, if they don't have it available on Tabletop Simulator, or at least have enough where I can watch enough playthroughs to be more than one playthrough, I'm not backing it. I don't know if you guys feel the same way.
I mean, having information available on the game certainly helps their campaign page. Yeah, well, a review style video is helpful. A playthrough style video is more helpful to me personally. And if a rulebook was available and I was really interested in the game, I would absolutely give it a skim.
Yeah, the rulebooks are definitely a big thing for me because you can tell a lot on how much they spend on the game, on how good the rulebook is.
I will say that while I don't particularly enjoy it when they have this all-in pledge that seems to have so much more content than the basic pledge. I think a certain level of that is like, okay, like, oh, here's a game, and because we're doing this on Kickstarter, here's like an expansion for the game. But like, it's clearly set aside in its own box, and you know that it's got like extra stuff in it. But like, you also expect the main box to be its own complete game without it.
Yeah, the base game can't be an afterthought. That has to be the first thing then. That has to work. Then you can add in the extras.
Or the base game can't be dependent.
Yeah. The other thing I would like to see more of is when they do a lot of this additional content, get reviewers to actually have separate videos for the additional content. Because what I find a lot of times is, yes, you get some extra content, but when it comes, sometimes they haven't put proper thought into those extra contents. You might not even have rules for some of the extra content. And you try to look it up, you don't know how to even use this stuff.
Or the other thing they do is they send their reviewers the extra content, and the reviewer doesn't know what the extra content is or not, and they end up reviewing everything, and then you don't have a good idea of where the base game is.
Yeah.
Yeah, then they tell you, like, hey, don't put that in there where that isn't actually going to be in the base game. I'm like, how am I going to know that? Just send me a box of stuff. And now they don't, and some of them don't even have like rules in them. You have to print them out separate, so that's always fun.
So some people may have noticed that the TTRPG guy of the group is being pretty quiet, and that's because I have backed a total of 0 board games on Kickstarter. And so now RPGs not a terrible ton, but I do have a quick question for those of you who have backed some board games on Kickstarter. And most of the games that catch my attention, the games that get funded really quickly, and so like Kickstarter's really promoting them, they are expensive games. So as a person who enjoys board games, who doesn't get them to the table as often as I would like, but I enjoy board games. But for me, a high-end expensive board game for a purchase for myself, the most expensive board game I've ever purchased was $100. And I don't know that I would ever go over that for a board game. So I feel like now, Kickstarter might not then really be for me when it comes to board games, because I don't see board games normally coming in under that on Kickstarter, at least not the ones that get really well promoted, that look like they've got a well put together page. So I don't go to Kickstarter much for board games myself for that exact reason.
So what you're going to see with that rules that you have on there is you're going to see publisher back Kickstarters or site companies that have high revenue that are going to be putting it on Kickstarter. So basically those are games that don't need to go on Kickstarter, and that's what you're seeing. If you have like a cheaper or less expensive game, those are generally going to be from indie developers, because a publisher is going to be like, I have a $15 game, I'm just publishing the damn thing.
So that's the thing. I mean, I get that doesn't bring Kickstarter all the money, but for those of us out there who can't spend a whole bunch of money on it, how do we find out about those games without pouring through Kickstarter to try? Like, for me, is it worth my time to go and try to find those games somewhere in the depths of Kickstarter? You know, so far it hasn't, like, I haven't spent the time to try to do that, because again, it seems like no matter what algorithm I use to try to find these games, I keep coming across the big ones, and I don't want to sit there and scroll for hours just trying to find one game that might be good, might look good, and is inexpensive, or at least middle range for myself.
Well, that's the big thing with Kickstarter. You have to factor in the added expense of shipping direct to the customers. So it is not cost effective to do inexpensive games. The more expensive the game, the more cost effective it is. So that's why there are far more expensive games than there are inexpensive
so again,
games.
I totally get all that, and that's why for someone like myself, Kickstarter's probably not the place for me. And that's why Dan keeps seeing me at the brick and mortar store.
You know, I'm going to agree with Pete, not just because he's promoting my store, but because I think because the Kickstarter is the platform that it is, I think it appeals to the more hardcore crowd, right? The people that want all the bling bling, right? The whales. And a lot like eBay auctions appeal to people, right? You throw an item up on eBay as an auction, it's probably going to go for above what it would at a retail establishment.
Yeah, that's the other thing is people got away from. Kickstarter used to be a platform where you would go to try to get your new design published. But most people aren't looking for that. And you aren't, because you're looking for the ones that fund. And those aren't necessarily the ones that fund. They're going to be high risk. They're going to be the guy that made a game that's trying to sell it for $10, but it's probably not going to make it, or it might make it on the last day and squeak in. And that's high risk, because that gets into the Kickstarter thing. Kickstarter doesn't guarantee anything. When a game is popular, it goes to the top of the searches. So that's going to be your publisher-based Kickstarter games that have a lot of hype, have a lot of advertisement. They have tons of money thrown around. Your little ones are going to go to the bottom. But Kickstarter does not say that if you back a game, you're going to get it. It doesn't say if you back anything, you're going to get it. You're not even necessarily going to get your money back if you don't get it. So that gets into, what am I going to risk my money on? Am I going to risk my money on a publisher that I know they're going to ship me the game because they have a lot to lose if they don't? Or Joe, who's producing his first game ever in his entire life, who may or may not know anything about publishing a board game, have priced it incorrectly and can't produce it after he collects his money.
I mean,
it happens.
James, you make a pretty good argument that Kickstarter isn't the right platform for small indie developers.
For the most part, it is not. It is just an avenue that is a potential avenue if they feel that they can't get published, but they still want to do it. Or they feel that they want to absolutely publish it themselves. But it's a high risk. It's not necessarily great. There's a lot of things that a known publisher understands that your first-time person doesn't. Like shipping is another thing that can kill you. Giving away too many Kickstarter rewards because you're getting overexcited because tons of people are backing it. There's all sorts of things that can kill you and make sure you lose your shirt, or kill your company.
Yeah, the devil is in the details, after all.
Yeah, and the more big publishers get involved in Kickstarter, the more those indie developers are going to disappear and not have a chance, because they'll get drowned out.
I think Kickstarter's already at the point where, for the most part, the only indie developers you really have pretty much have completed games. And they're like, here we go. And Wizards and Relics, which is a really fun, really great game. That was pretty inexpensive game. But I don't think any of you heard about it necessarily until I brought it up. And the same with Faction Battlegrounds. No one really, it's just whoever's on those social media platforms and happens to be following us or other people that are showing it off are the only ones that really hear about it. So they have a hard time and they have an uphill battle.
Well, Factions Battleground was one of the ones that did show up on my search, but then I do back a lot of games, so it does kind of have an idea what I'm interested in. It does actually get a better recommendations for me than somebody who, if you haven't backed anything, is not going to have a clue what you like. It's just going to recommend what's ever popular.
Yeah. Mine, anything Eric Lang, it's like, hey, look at this, or Seymour.
Yeah.
But my question is because we're Tabletop Gaming Guild. We're more than board games, we do RPGs, we're miniature games. So my question is for Peter, who has said he backed a couple RPGs. What is your prerequisite, or what do you look for when you're because I know RPGs, like if I look at we did a couple of them, they're not necessarily as put together as to that end as a board game. They're more of the concept or the idea, some pictures. So what are you looking for?
The time when I'm looking at an RPG game and one is it a 5th edition tangential thing? One, because I know that. It's I know D&D, I know how the game plays, and so is it 5th edition? Now if it's not 5th edition, if it's something totally new, then I'm just looking for a cool concept. So if it's got really nice art to sell the theme, art is a huge thing when it comes to RPGs for me. I want to see that you've taken the time, put the money into it to visually show us your theme for this game. If they can put together a nice little 1 to 2 minute promo showing some of that art and giving me a story to sell the theme of the game, can be good as well. But again, just something interesting. And then I personally I usually go in on the lower end of the projects, and so most of the time it's, is there a decently priced PDF version of the game as well? Are you going to sell me the PDF? And again, I'll go 20-25 on a PDF if it seems like it's going to be really good amount of pages. If it's going to be 50 to 100 pages into whether it's rules or whether it's just magic items and spells and whatever it's going to do to extend either the game that I already have or be a new game. But that's usually what I'm looking for. I'm looking for something that just stands out as really interesting, or that it's already going to be adding to a game that I already know. I guess that's really what I'm going for.
That brings up a question. So now, on a new game, this is a new system. Are you okay with just the core rulebook, or are you looking like you need, if it's a new system, do you want more than the core rulebook?
Then I want the core rulebook and at least one small adventure. It needs to have here's the rule set and here's how it actually plays. Because if I've never seen it played before, if I can't see what an adventure looks like, then it's too nebulous for me. I'm not someone who can just read a rule book usually and then just see how it should go. But again, most RPGs nowadays seem to be leaning towards that already. I think they're noticing that. And so a lot of them, as they're coming out, there's the rule book and then at least one small adventure. And if the Kickstarter is doing really well, then they will start to add on. That's usually like the thing that they add on is, well, we'll do a second adventure, or we'll do a third adventure, or sometimes we'll do more art. But it's usually the adventure because they know that that's the content that really helps the person because the person who's backing is going to be the person who's going to run this game. It's not the people who are, I'm not just going to back it and hope that somebody else runs it for me. These are the people who are like, I want the game and I want to run it for my friends. And so if you can give me a short adventure to then sell my friends on your game, that does it. Because, and again, if they really love it, then it might be something that I can go back and then I can buy, my friends can go back and buy the game later. A really good example of this was MCDM back when they did their Strongholds and Followers. They did the core rulebook that also had a short adventure in it. And then after it had, already fulfilled, you could still go back on their company store and buy more copies of the PDF, and then you could gift it to friends. And so when I realized that it was good enough that I thought my friends would actually utilize it, I went back and actually bought like a couple more copies of the PDF just to give as gifts to my friends. But yeah, I think it's got to have the core rulebook. It's got to have at least a short adventure, because otherwise I don't know well enough how it's going to play.
Have you backed any RPGs that are not D&D?
Yes, so I actually pulled up my Kickstarter backed projects page so that I could see which ones I have backed. And I've not, because again, I've not backed very many things. But the one that stands out the most that is not 5th ed is Kids on Bikes, which did well enough that it's already had, I think, at least one, if not two, different iterations now. I know there's Kids on Brooms as well now for those who are more Harry Potter focused and not Stranger Things focused. But the original Kids on Bikes came out, and that one sold me because they had it was really topical at the time. Stranger Things had just come out. People were into the whole 80s thing, being teenagers again. And then they also got a lot of really well-known RPG freelance writers to say that they would write short adventures for the book. And so that was a really good way to know that, hey, I know these people, they write good adventures, so it'll be easy for me to, again, get this game to the table. And then I think I've only got maybe one other thing that's not 5th ed, but it is broadly RPG related, so that you could apply it to just about any game system. But most everything else that I personally have purchased on Kickstarter has been 5th ed.
So the things that you've actually purchased on Kickstarter, was it just the Kickstarter page that got you to get excited about it and purchase it, or was it a video or a session that was video recorded, or other article reviews that really got you into it? So basically, what were you looking for?
Most of the things that I've purchased, I found out about outside of Kickstarter first. Just in the RPG world, I was watching a video on YouTube or somewhere, and they mentioned, hey, I'm going to be a part of this project, you should check it out. So it was a lot of word of mouth through YouTube, and just the RPG community on either Facebook or Twitter, mostly Twitter. They've got a really big community on there that talks about projects that are coming out. So I think maybe only one. Yeah, one, I think, really was, I just happened to stumble on it on Kickstarter and thought it looked good. But everything else was just someone from outside the community, or from in the community but outside of Kickstarter, told me about it.
Yeah, that's actually similar to board games, because that's how I learn about all the Kickstarter games. None of it through Kickstarter. I learn about it through Instagram or Facebook or YouTube.
Don't think just jumping on Kickstarter and browsing is the way to go with Kickstarter. Like if you're hoping to find something, it's almost always, it seems like it's going to be, you're going to find out about it somewhere else, and then you're going to go to Kickstarter just for backing it. You know, I don't spend time on Kickstarter for anything.
I found a lot of games myself by browsing Kickstarter, but yeah, I go there, I check once I see it there, it'll pique my interest, and I'll check on other board game media sites to find out more about it. I don't exclusively go by Kickstarter. But yeah, I also do, there's the upcoming page, I do go into that a lot to see what's, not even available yet on Kickstarter, what's coming in the future. But yeah, there's also a lot of other outside stuff that I watch. People like Tantrum House that talk about what's coming out, and Dice Tower, of course. But yeah, so I am one of those fools that kind of spends way too much time on Kickstarter and spends way too much money. But going back to inexpensive games, that I just remembered one of the things I actually wanted to talk about under trends, where publishers of inexpensive games often are starting to bundle them for Kickstarter so that it makes it more financially viable to launch them. So you get like 3 to 5 $10 games instead of just backing one $10 game. So that might be something kind of more what you're looking for. That is becoming more popular, but I just kind of wanted to see what you guys thought about that trend.
It's still going to be the same thing. It's just going to be bundling a whole bunch of games together to get that high value on there. In general, if you're only looking at spending $10 or getting a good game for $20-$30 even, because that's really going to be your middle ground for an inexpensive game. It's really going to be closer to that $30 area. So those are still going to come generally retail. You have a couple exceptions, like Gameland Games does a lot of Kickstarters for their Tiny Epic lines, and those are inexpensive. They're, $20 on Kickstarter in shipping instead of $25, I think, right?
No,
you backed a couple, Dan, right?
Yeah. I've backed them on Kickstarter and also carry them in my store. And it's $25, I think, either way. I think you have to pay an extra shipping charge, right? You have to pay for shipping if you get it through Kickstarter.
Yeah, but you get a couple
Yeah,
things
you
too.
always get, each game comes with something Kickstarter exclusive, though. Usually, a couple extra firepowers or a promo or, a mini expansion. It varies by the game title. So there is that.
And I think they do subsidize the shipping, too, because I don't think it was all that high. So with the little promos, it probably is a wash, so it's probably good to just get it on the Kickstarter page, I would think. What do you think?
Yeah, what do you call it? I seem to recall shipping being like, I don't know, $5 and it showing up in a padded envelope. So it worked for me.
Yeah, that works. I like Kickstarters where they either subsidize the shipping or they're for a little bit, or they don't go overboard on the shipping cost. Because they're like, we're not going to put it in a titanium container that is cryogenically sealed. Which, I don't want to damage game, but I also, don't need Fort Knox coming in. So there's that.
Well, one of the trends I've been seeing a lot, especially with Kickstarters, especially with RPGs, is the option to have print and play versions, which I do like that. And some of them even go as far as, if you buy a copy of the game, you make a print and play available for somebody who can't necessarily afford the game. That works, I think, for RPGs. Not so well for most board games. Although the one that we interviewed did have the ones where you could pledge to donate to a library, and I like that.
Yeah, that was Faction Battlegrounds. I thought that was really cool. But I hate print and plays. Print and plays, no. I hate print and plays. Especially board game print and plays.
Again, yeah.
Unless it's a roll and write, no.
Again, yeah, it doesn't work well for board games. I don't think it'd be too bad for an RPG. I mean, probably Peter can speak more to that, but
you don't have to print them. If you get an RPG, just read the PDF.
True.
The only reason I would print them is components, like cards and stuff. Or player sheets, like RPGs, your player sheet. Sure. Yeah. They work for RPGs because you don't need to print anything other than player sheets.
Yeah, it depends on whether
Maybe
whether or not you print something from a PDF for an RPG is based on whether or not you're comfortable or can reasonably have like a laptop at the table while you're gaming too, because some people don't have access to that. So
yeah, and I'm not, and I don't. They would have to get access to it. I'd give them an iPad to watermark something because I'm not printing out a 120-page book. They can read the darn iPad. Yes.
The other thing we very briefly touched on was bloat from Kickstarter, and I really kind of want to rant a little bit about that, because if you've seen my unboxing of Anachrony, that game scares me. I unboxed that. I mean, the box itself is £30. There's so many minis. Then I go up, I pull out 5 rule books. Over 100 pages of rules. And then an instruction manual on how to actually... An 8-page instruction manual on how to actually put everything back in the box. It's that complicated. I'm terrified by this game. I don't know if I'll ever play it.
For perspective, we do double time for our unboxing, and it's a 10-minute unboxing.
Yeah, it's a hard pass for me, guys.
Oh, no, that's next game night. On a serious note, I would love to play the base game of Anachrony. 100% want to play the base game of Anachrony.
Mm-hmm.
Don't know about anything else. I want to try the base game.
If I can figure out which components go to the base game, we'll do that.
Fair. So you're not talking. You're not just talking about the. When you first said bloat, I thought you meant the number of games releasing on Kickstarter like per year, which we all know has been going up for several years and only took a break like this past year or two, year and a half, mostly because of COVID. You were talking about the amount of stuff they try to stuff into a single game.
Yeah, getting the kitchen sink in the box.
Fair enough.
Yeah, and I like miniatures. So if the kitchen sink involves lots of miniatures, I don't care. I'll paint them. Yeah, but we could use them for other things. It doesn't actually have to be like we could go. Peter could do an Egyptian themed D&D game, and I could bring tons of miniatures. Really good, or Viking themed, or old Japanese theme. You know, got it.
I'm still waiting for a Kickstarter to be very literal and actually include a mini for the kitchen sink.
There was one. It was a Zombicide one, I think. There was one that had a kitchen sink.
Nice. But before we transition to your last bit there, James, I just want to go on record that as a gamer, I am glad that Kickstarter exists. And I think it's given us a lot of good stuff over the years that has been in existence, and it will probably continue to do so. And as a retailer, I'm glad that it exists too, because it's not like I'm totally locked out of that marketplace. If the store was a slightly different position, some of those like 6-box pledge levels might be pretty tempting. And, there are stores out there that do order the Kickstarter version of games so that they specifically can stock them. And I've seen games that are on Kickstarter that my distributor also solicits to me. And that gives me the option of ordering that game from my distributor to get the retail copy. The company's money isn't locked up for a year and a half. I get billed when that game shows up at my door.
Yeah, and the other thing, too, is you, as a retailer, you can say, hey, that was super popular. I bet I could probably sell 1 or 2 copies. Instead of, maybe this game's cool. Let's give it a shot.
Yeah, it also gives me the luxury of waiting to see how the game works on that other marketplace before I actually do place my order.
All right, so I don't back a lot of Kickstarters at all. And so my count of Kickstarter backing is 4. It's not a huge amount. So it takes a lot for me to back a Kickstarter. Will I buy it retail? I do that a lot. It's just the initial backing a Kickstarter, maybe not. But I have 3 games that I was super interested in on Kickstarter. And one of them is we got a prototype copy that I reviewed. So there's a preview of it up already. And I'm doing a second preview of it. And that is Cult of the Deep. And that Kickstarter is coming out February 2nd. So this game here, you guys know how much I like social deduction games. As in, I don't. I hate them. I like this one.
Okay.
It has a Cthulhu theme that helps. But all the stuff that I super hate from social deduction games, where the most of the game is the social deduction, this game fixed for me. The only social deduction portion of it is when you're trying to determine how you're going to win. Because you can have several different hidden roles in the game. And depending on if you're a cultist or you're the high priest or what you are, depends on what you need to do to win. So you're trying to suss out what the other people are while you go through the game. And you're doing different things throughout the game to, like, you're completing rituals and you get bonuses from that. You have a sigil bonus as a one-time bonus. You have your chucking dice. So it's actually a board game that has a social deduction mechanism in it instead of a social deduction game that has stuff. So that's really big for me, is because I don't like werewolf. I don't like Mafia. I hate Resistance. I don't like any of those games. I can't play them. I don't like them. They're not for me. I will not eat the green eggs and ham. I don't care. I'm not playing it in a box with a fox. I'm not playing them. But this game, theme, and the way it played was amazing. You can win the game by just playing well and making a reasonable guess on what you need to do instead of a wild guess. So I do really like that game. I think that it's going to do really well on Kickstarter. It has really good components. I got to see the metal coins that come with it, which are really nice. I love metal coins. And they're Cthulhu-based metal coins, so
you can use them for other games.
And the cards are really nice. And you do have asymmetric player powers that matter in the game. They give you bonuses. You can do actions based off of them. It's not just like some sort of fluff. It's really good. Cult of the Deep surprised me a lot. I really enjoyed playing it, and I think that one is definitely a game that I'm going to pick up. And whether it's Kickstarter or afterwards, I don't know, but I'm going to get it. The other one is I like Ryan Lockett, and Ryan Lockett's doing a Kickstarter called Now or Never, which is the now third part of the trilogy. So if you've played Above and Below or Near and Far, this is the next one, Now or Never. And in all of those games, there's a heavy story element in the game. Now, Above and Below was less, Near and Far was more, and basically you uncover story elements as you play the game, which I really like. So you're going down, in Above and Below, you're going down into the caverns, and you have different story elements that trigger. And Near and Far, you're traveling, and you have different story elements that trigger. Now or Never is going to be a city-building game that continues the storyline of the other two games and has more, I believe, more story elements to it. So I love Ryan Lockett's games in general. He does everything, the art, the components, the game, everything. He does all of it. And I super interested about Now or Never from Ryan Lockett, which is Red Raven Games. So that is my second one. I don't know if any of you guys played. I know Nathan has. I know, Nathan, you'd at least played Above and Below, right?
Mm-hmm. And that's the only one from the trilogy. I've played a couple of his other games too, but
yeah. What about you, Dan or Peter? Have you played any of the Red Raven games?
Not that I know of.
Above and Below was actually a previous own for me. I thought it was actually a pretty solid, the story element is definitely in the game, but like the core mechanisms of the game, it feels like almost like resource management. And resources were pretty tight, if I remember right, in that game.
That is correct. And funny story, I have your copy.
Oh, okay. There you go. That's where it went, folks. Previous own for me. James apparently has my copy.
So if you liked Above and Below, but it didn't completely click with you, you may want to take a look at Near and Far. Because like a lot of the board game designers, he builds off his previous concepts. So he took what was good in Above and Below and made it better in Near and Far. And I'm sure the same thing will happen with Now or Never. So you probably want to give Near and Far a try. And it might actually push it past that point and maybe a game you keep. Maybe.
Yeah, I got the same impression. Because Above and Below, I wasn't terribly impressed with, but I've loved everything else I played by him.
Yeah, I really like 8-Minute Empire. I want to get the 8-Minute Empire, the Legends one or whatever. I can't find that one. But I loved 8-Minute Empire. And that's a super short game. It's not 8 minutes. It's not 8 minutes.
Definitely not, yeah.
But it's a really nice area control style game that you use cards to determine what you do on your turn. So you basically drafting. You're picking from a row of cards that's available, and it costs more the farther you go in and stuff. But you have to pay attention to what other people have because you don't want to make certain cards cheaper for them. It's a really cool game. Like it a lot. It takes about 15 to 20 minutes to play 8-Minute Empire. So you can get it a ton of games in and a lot of replayability with that one.
Islebound is an excellent game. There's a lot closer in the feel to the Above and Below, even though it's not technically in the Above and Below universe. But yeah, it's one of his really excellent games.
Yeah, I haven't actually played very many past that, so I really want to play that one and a couple of the other ones he has. So I definitely want to get more into his games. The last one I have is, of course, Terraforming Mars. There's going to be another Kickstarter in February of 2021, so next month, for Terraforming Mars Ares Expedition. And before people are freaking out, like, I already have enough Terraforming Mars cards, or they're crazy and they're like, I need a bigger deck that I can't manage at all. It's not compatible with Terraforming Mars.
Oh, this is the card game.
It's a standalone card game. So it's 1 to 4 players, and it takes about between 45 to 60 minutes. Based on knowledge from Terraforming Mars, that means it takes 1.5 to 2 hours to play. So, because their time frames on Terraforming Mars aren't even close to right. So I'm assuming these ones are wrong too, but I could be wrong. Who knows? I'm super excited to see it. It's Terraforming Mars is sort of a card game anyway. The board really doesn't do a whole lot. I mean, you could place tiles on it, but you could probably replace all that with cards. So I'm not sure how it's different. So I'll be really interested to see when the Kickstarter goes up, what's going on. Like, how is it different from Terraforming Mars? Because it's just Terraforming Mars with cards, which they can totally do. I'm going to probably pass, because I already have Terraforming Mars. Got to have something new and neat. But I am very interested in it, because I do love Terraforming Mars, and I know my oldest daughter, it's her favorite game ever. So, we'll see.
So, yeah, you had promised that you would have one Kickstarter that I hadn't heard of, and you did, in fact, have one. I hadn't heard of Now or Never. I'm guessing that's kind of a little bit far off as far as the Kickstarter launch, because I know Cult of the Deep and Terraform Mars are like late February, possibly, for their launch, but I'm guessing Now or Never is going to be later in the year.
It's 2021.
Yeah.
So whatever that means, whatever it means, generally that's going to mean like third quarter, fourth quarter, if they don't have a date. Because if it was going to be first quarter, they would have already set the date. If it's going to be second quarter, they probably already would have set the date. So it's probably third or fourth quarter, so probably look for it more towards the end of the year. Still waiting for Blood Rage 2, though. That's coming.
You know, Pete's comment earlier about what he's backed on Kickstarter made me look at my account. My account is wrong. Like, I look at my profile, and it's got a list of backed projects, and there's 5 items on the list. And one of them isn't Sword and Sorcery, which I know I backed, and Seventh Continent, which I know I backed. It's like 4 Tiny Epics and Zaya, Embers of the Forsaken Star.
I was going to say, I think there's a button that might extend your list further down.
There is. You also have a history that'll show you, like, your whole history, too.
Where do I find that?
Now, if you back a project that failed, I think they disappear after a while. Yeah, and it should show all your stuff. I know Nathan probably has 8 pages, so...
No, I mean, I talk like I backed a lot of things. But compared to others, I backed nothing. I've backed 35 games.
We'll get to work. More games. 35? That's double that.
I mean, most of those...
Easier to spend other people's money.
The majority of those were in the first year of getting into Kickstarter. So, yeah, a lot of them were like pretty much back to back, but I've slowed down a lot lately. Been a bit,
yep.
The bloat and, the delays and stuff, this kind of lost some of its shine for me. But, I kind of optimistic, though, because I'm starting to see possible competitors for Kickstarters coming out. So, even if they don't necessarily show much, they're at least... kick Kickstarter in the butt to get them going and get them, improving and, getting new ideas out of
it.
But
a lot of this doesn't have anything to do with Kickstarter, really.
Right.
Because there are other people. And really, and like the other crowdfunding platforms are just really publisher-based pre-order systems.
Yeah. So. Well, the big complaint that I hear from Kickstarter, and the big reason why some of these other sites are starting and getting some attention is because, the pledge manager. Kickstarter, from what I hear, doesn't do a great job, the post-campaign, and basically are relying on third party for that.
Yeah, most people have to use a third-party pledge manager. Yep. But Kickstarter really wasn't built for that. It was really built just to get your thing going, and then you do whatever you have to do. And you should be doing your funds through... And to be fair, the only reason the Kickstarter pledge manager is needed after the Kickstarter campaign is if you do generally your shipping outside of Kickstarter.
Yeah. And, I've looked around on GameFound. It doesn't have much there yet, but it is a much nicer looking format, and it's much easier to find what you're looking for and, really know what you're getting.
They're just started, so you have to give them some time, because I think the first game ever that got put up on it was like a couple weeks.
It's one big name thing that had a lot of money to spend on making sure their site looked good. The page looked good.
Sure, or
So-
get people to it, because they need. The issue with the new ones is they need people.
Right.
Kickstarter has people. They don't. So anyway, do you guys have anything else you want to mention about Kickstarter?
Don't think so. I have not backed my last game. I will say that. I will probably back some game in the future. I think the way that publishers pitch games directly to their audiences will continue to grow and evolve, like everything else does in this world.
Yep, and I agree. I have not backed my last game. Eric M. Lang has not retired yet.
I'm kind of wondering, if you had a Kickstarter page that just said his name and no other information, would you back it?
Probably.
I do also have to say, of the 35 games I backed, only 3 of them are no longer in my collection. So
Yeah, that's pretty good.
That is a pretty surprisingly good hit rate,
Now-
I guess.
Yeah.
there's 5 I've not gotten yet because they're I didn't back them that long ago. But I'm really optimistic about the 5 I have not gotten because like Ankh and Frosthaven are among them,
That's fair.
and Dark Tower. Return to Dark Tower.
I'll say the other designer that I'll automatically back is Isaac Childress, as long as it's like a Gloomhaven style one. Because I didn't like, the one wasn't good. What was that one? Founders of Gloomhaven or whatever?
Yeah, did I give you my copy of that?
No.
I'm not sure I still have that one, actually.
But I missed out on Frosthaven because I was technically furloughed at that point, so it wouldn't be really responsible to spend money. But, he's a great designer, and I love Gloomhaven. So that brings us so their next episode is going to be on our top 10 games of all time, and this will be the first time.
Oh my gosh, do I even
Peter
have
has a
10
list.
games? I don't know, guys. It's gonna be tough. I don't know.
You better have 10 games. You just make them up. You play 10 games.
yeah, that's a thing. Though, Peter, you can cheat because last year for my number 1, I had to name Magic as the game that most defined me as a gamer, and I considered that cheating. So you can cheat and put D&D somewhere on the list. I give you permission.
Probably have to do that.
DNA is not a board game. No. We did enough playthroughs that you should have 10.
I'm sure I'll come up with 10. Blood Rage is definitely gonna
Blood
be
Rage.
Yeah.
Blood
so,
Rage.
So listen in, everybody.
Yeah.
See if Peter can find 10. Yeah.
And James, you have to have at least one on your list that's not an Eric Lang game.
Oh, that has to be. Yeah, that's happening. I like a lot of his earlier games, but yeah, you'll see. You'll see.
Oh, you'll definitely have some surprises from mine.
Blood Rage is on mine.
Is it?
To the surprise of no one.
I probably could make your top 10 for you.
Let's see if Nathan can not only... I'll give him points if he gets my list.
But if he
which
gets them in
I
order...
don't think it will be very
Yeah,
hard.
for sure.
But also the order.
The order is going to be hard. I'd have hard time figuring out my own order.
And you're not allowed to look at my BGG account.
Oh, darn it.
What?
That makes it a little hard.
So that was our episode on Kickstarter. Look forward to our top 10 games. I'm looking forward to it. Let's see if Peter can do it. We'll see. He might have top 8. I don't know. We'll see. But thank you for listening, and stay tuned.
Thank you for listening. If you have any feedback for us, feel free to visit us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or Board Game Geek Guild 2989, or our website at tabletopgamingguild.com. And don't forget to like, follow, and or subscribe. Tabletop Gaming Guild is a product of Tabletop Gaming Guild, LLC. All rights reserved.